Today my message is called rage bait. Rage bait. Now rage bait, you probably know this is something from the internet, but it's when somebody posts something deliberately infuriating because they want to provoke just a reaction and get more views, and it's kind of like clickbait. And if I were to get onto Threads and say that the best Beyonce song is Party in the USA, that would be rage bait, okay? If I was to post a photo outside of Dunkin' D's and say, these are the best donuts in Portland, that would be rage bait. If I were to go and tell my children that I spent all the money for Christmas presents on books for myself, that would be a death wish. Yeah. Be goner. But we all deal with those situations that infuriate us, that aggravate us, that upset us. And I had a situation like that, where somebody says something and your blood just starts to boil. And, you have a choice in that moment whether you're going to lash out back and kind of meet them at their own level and fight fire with fire. I had a moment like this a while ago. It's a story that I am ashamed of, but I was in downtown, doing some shopping over near Pioneer Square, and my phone completely died. And I didn't have my car or whatever, and so I needed my phone just to get back home, whether it was going to be using the Max or an Uber or just calling my wife or whatever it was. My phone's completely dead. And I thought, what I'll do? I'm going to go to the place where I have spent thousands upon thousands of dollars, where I have been a loyal customer for decades. I'm going to go to the Apple store, and surely this trillion-dollar company won't mind me charging my phone inside of the Apple store. So I'm sitting there charging my phone, playing around with one of the new laptops, and this lady comes over to me, and she goes, "Sir, are you going to purchase something? Can I help you buy something? Otherwise, you're going to have to leave." And in this moment, do you know how many Apple devices I own? Do you know that I had the first iPod with the click wheel? Do you know I was more of a father to Steve Jobs' daughter than he ever was? Yeah. I'm like, Tim Cook, you'll be hearing from him. We play pickleball. I will storm out of the store. And then my conscience immediately gets to me. I'm 50 yards from the store. And I realized I left my phone in there. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't. But, my blood is just, I'm having stress hormones just telling this story. But, in that moment, I regret it. I kind of, to use a colloquial term that we all know, I let the Karen turn me into a Karen. I met her on her own level. I played her own game. I took the rage bait. And whether it's with a stranger in a store, or it's in the workplace with a coworker, or it's with a family member, maybe it's a parent, could be a romantic partner, could be a roommate, could be a spouse. We all have those situations where the rage becomes contagious, where we get pulled into the vicious cycle. And we landed at this passage from 1 Peter right the week of Thanksgiving. And I think sometimes family gatherings like this, although they're so fun, they're so exciting, sometimes there's so much pressure, there's so much expectation. We're maybe seeing relatives that we don't get along with so well. I think it's the perfect time for a reminder to say, don't take the bait. Don't take the bait. Don't meet people. Don't fight fire with fire. That's what Peter is telling us. Now, this series, Liquid Gold, is on the book of 1 Peter. It was written shortly after Jesus by one of his best friends to churches that are in modern-day Turkey. Back then, they called it Pontus, Bithynia. They called it Asia Minor. But they were people who were going to be excluded. They were going to be ridiculed. They were going to be mocked. Sometimes they would even be imprisoned, antagonized. They'd even be tortured and executed. And they were humans exactly like you and I. We got to realize that. They were exactly as human as you and I are, and they were tempted to want to lash back, to want to strike back in rage. And Peter's telling them, don't take the bait. Be a peacemaker. Learn how to de-escalate conflict. In today's message, hopefully what you're going to learn three things. If you lock in, you're going to learn to resolve conflict in your relationships or get better at resolving conflict in your relationships. You're going to learn how to talk with people who don't believe about your faith, because if we're honest, that can be an area of conflict that we don't even want to get into it because it's too hard. And then finally, how Jesus can help us in all of these areas when it's challenging. So those are the three things hopefully we'll learn. Let's go. So the first point this morning on the topic of conflict resolution is that payback is cheap, but empathy is priceless. Payback is cheap, but empathy is priceless. Look at verse 8. Finally, all of you, be like-minded. Some translations say, be harmonious, have harmony. Be sympathetic, love one another. Be compassionate and humble. Now, you can't, if we leave that on the screen for a sec, that's so attractive. Right? We all appreciate people who are like that. We all want people in our lives to be sympathetic to us. Right? We want to surround ourselves with people who are harmonious and compassionate and sympathetic and loving and people who aren't arrogant, prideful jerks. We all want those. In fact, we want friends like that so bad, we pay for them. It's called therapy. We pay people to treat us like this. That's what we do. And Peter is telling him to become these kinds of people, to become this way. And that when we do that, if we kind of look back in 1 Peter, what he said in chapter 1, when we do that, we become a temple where heaven touches earth. We become this sneak preview of the new creation. We become this Garden of Eden where we bring paradise everywhere we go. If we become these kind of people, to use a different metaphor Peter uses, we become liquid gold. We become priceless. We become more precious than gold. That's the kind of friend that we want to have. And so to be sympathetic, to be compassionate, it's to feel what others feel. It's to, when someone's suffering, you just go, oh, they're suffering. You actually you imagine what it's like to be in their situation. You weep with those who weep. That when one body of the suffers, the whole body suffers, to use other biblical examples, putting yourselves in their shoes. Now, this is a massive tool for conflict resolution, whether it's a conflict with your spouse, conflict at work, just fill in the blank, any situation you want. But a psychologist from Harvard named Julia Minson, she has developed this thing and kind of shown it in lab settings and scientific studies, the effectiveness of conversational receptiveness. And what that does to de-escalate conflict isn't just practicing empathy in your head, but practicing empathy with your words. So, because what happens, I'm human, I get in arguments, not just for the lady at the Apple store, I get in arguments in other parts of my life. What's so easy to happen is you just start talking past each other. You're like, this is how I feel. No, this is how I feel. No, this is what you did. No, this is what you did. No, and you're just going back and forth, and there isn't any receptivity. It's all outward aggression. It's all, active communication. You're kind of attacking. But what happens in conversational receptiveness is you take some of your airtime to show the person, prove the person you have actually received their message. You've actually heard them. And so rather than just going, oh yeah, that's how you feel. Well, this is how I feel, and just launching back, you go, oh, you take time to verbalize your empathy. You go, what you're saying is that, when I didn't do the dishes and I left my Chemex all over the kitchen counter, Becca, it made you ununappreciated for how much you'd cleaned earlier in the week. Whatever. Not that that's ever happened before, but you take time unsarcastically, unironically, to demonstrate your receptivity, that you are receiving their message, you're empathizing with their point of view, and you ask follow-up questions. By the way, I always just like to help people socially because, we all have different skills that we're better in and worse in. But the way to make anyone like you and want to be around you is to ask questions. Like that, the best people, you want to do better on dates? Ask questions. Don't just launch a diatribe at them for 40 minutes about yourself. Ask questions about them, ask follow-up questions. But if you ask questions in a conflict, you ask follow-up questions in a conflict, you restate, showing the other person that you're receptive to what they're saying, it just takes the air out of the fire. It just takes everything down a notch, and it forces you to slow down. Because if you're anything like me and Becca, we are pop, 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 pop. It's just so easy to pop off on each other, but it forces you to slow down. A lot of times people aren't looking for a lecture, they're looking for a listening ear. They're just looking for support. And what this researcher from Harvard said, and the Bible says the same thing all over the place, is that you can earn someone else's ear by proving that yours work. In other words, by being receptive and listening to what the other person's saying and restating it back to them, they actually become more receptive to what you say, and then you create peace. You create harmony by doing that. So I think that's pretty fantastic. Let's look at verse 9. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you might inherit a blessing. We can walk away sometimes going, I showed them, I gave them what they deserve, I gave them a piece of my mind, I taught them a thing or two. But in those situations where we feel like, and honestly, like some of us, we can't even do it in the argument. Like we're thinking like later down the road, like I should have said this. Oh, that would have been so clever. I don't know. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation. But when we are clapping back and we're lashing back and we're doing these kinds of things, don't you realize you're just becoming a mirror image of your enemy? They were mean, so what do? I'm going to be mean. They were cruel, so I'm going to be cruel. You're becoming just like them. When you hate your enemy, you become your enemy. But when you love your enemies, you lead your enemies. When we do that, we haven't changed a thing. When we repay evil for evil, it just creates more evil. When you repay evil for evil, evil wins. And Peter knows this firsthand. He's not just writing this from an ivory tower. Peter's come a long way. We studied Peter all summer long, and Peter knew how to be loud. He knew how to speak more than he listens, and he also knew how to actually literally chop somebody's ear off their head, because he was trying to repay evil for evil and fight fire with fire in the Garden of Gethsemane, but he's come a long way. Now Peter is a wise old man, and he's learned from Jesus, and he's saying, hey, don't return cursing for cursing, return cursing for blessing. And it can change lives, and it's extraordinary. Most of us probably know that there was sporadic persecution throughout the Roman Empire. Some of it was like mandated by Caesar, but a lot of it was just like sporadic things happening throughout the empire. But there is not a single record of Christians like mounting a revenge campaign, of mounting like a retaliation campaign, even though they were being burned at the stake, even though they were being fed to lions, even though they were being crucified upside down. All the letters of the New Testament tell them, hey, don't get back, don't fight back, don't lash back. But want to know what happened? In a matter of years, they overcame evil with good. In a matter of years, the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire. And the empire that had crucified Jesus became around to worship Jesus. It's extraordinary. Could give you examples from my own life, but we'll just leave it at that one from history for now. He quotes from Psalm 34, and I always like to just note that Peter was a blue-collar fisherman, but he was steeped in Scripture. He memorized the Scripture. Probably long before he met Jesus, he probably memorized Psalm 34, because all Jewish boys and girls would. But he quotes from Psalm 34, where David's running from Saul, or David doesn't repay evil to Saul. He's running from Abimelech. And he quotes from that. And I like verse 11. Let's focus in on verse 11, where he's quoting Psalm 34. He says, they must turn from evil and do good. People who want to live a good life. They want a life full of blessing and joy. They must seek peace and pursue it. And peace is a pursuit. It's something you have to chase after. I know a lot of people run here in Portland. We got the Nike headquarters. You got to train for that marathon. You got to train to become a peacemaker. You have to seek peace and pursue it. Empathy opens hearts. Payback hardens hearts. Anybody can get payback. Anybody can lash back. The person cusses at you. How smart, how intelligent, how skilled do you have to be just to cuss somebody out back? They're cussing you out, so you cuss them back. Anybody can do that. You want to be priceless. You want to be rare. You want to be exceptional. Learn how to repay evil with good. Learn how to bless those who curse you. Empathy paves a path for peace. Now, I also want to look at the word blessing. He says, return cursing with blessing. To this you were called that you might inherit a blessing. The word blessing here is the word eulogia in Greek, where we get our word eulogy. Eulogy. And I think this provides just a nice little illustration from our modern context of why you should try to live this way. You go, Jesse, why should I live this way? That feels hard. It feels weak. I don't want to be the weak one. I'll tell you why. That person at Thanksgiving that you're lashing out at one day, that person, every single person you fight with, every coworker, every single person, one day somebody's going to be giving their eulogy. One day somebody's going to be giving your eulogy. And if we live with our eulogies in mind and realize you are writing your own eulogy every single day, and if you live with your own funeral in mind and you live with their funeral in mind, and you realize this aunt who I'm going crazy on right now, one day I'm going to be at her funeral. This mom who I'm so furious at, this person, one day my kids are going to be giving my eulogy. And I think the fights that we want to get into, the little minuscule things we want to make big deals out of, and I can't back down on this. This is the last time, this is going to be the last stand of the Mohicans or something like this is what I'm going to die on is the way, she spent too much money on this credit card statement, whatever it is, like whatever thing you just feel like you have to get your point across with. I think when you put it in perspective of a eulogy, you put it in the perspective of a funeral, you might choose your battles a little more carefully. And you might choose how you approach those things more carefully. And you might be a little more cautious with the words you say, because as someone who's lost a lot of people and I've officiated about 20 weddings, and I've officiated about double the amount of funerals. Because only some people get weddings, everybody gets a funeral. but I've officiated a lot of them, and I'll tell you what, you're going to regret those horrible words that came out of your mouth one day. You're going to regret the things that you lashed out with. And so if we live with that in mind, I think we'll want to be people of blessing. Let's put verse 8 back on the screen one more time. It's just so wonderful. Unity, sympathy, love, compassion, humility. We all like that. We like that. But there are rival values in our culture that will sabotage these qualities. Because what's the main message we get in our culture over and over again? We watched Zootopia the other day, and it's a fun movie, but this is the message that's in every movie. We learn it from kindergarten. It is the default assumption of everyone in our culture. It's this: be true to yourself. Follow your heart. Don't let anyone stop you. Don't let anyone stand in your way. Don't sacrifice for anyone. Protect your peace. There's not time to be a peacemaker. That will be hard. That will be depleting. That'll be tiring and exhausting. I can't be a peacemaker. I got to protect my own peace. I got to protect my own mental health. That's what we say. But here's the deal. Want to know what psychologists have pointed out? The American Psychological Association, a study by Sarah Conrath, she says that empathy is in steep decline in the United States of America. That people are less empathetic than ever. You can look it up. Sarah Conrath says the decline of empathy in the United States and the rise of narcissism. We all want empathy from others, but we don't want to give any empathy. Why? Because we got to protect our peace. We got to follow our hearts. We got to be true to ourselves. There's no time for empathy, but want to know what's happening is as we pursue our own comfort in the short term, we are creating a very uncomfortable reality in the long term. We're creating a world that is harder and darker and more divided and more isolated. But Peter is inviting us into a life where we say, you know what? I'm going to die to myself. I'm going to do the hard thing. I'm going to choose discomfort. Peacemaking will cost you something. That's the message of the cross. Being a peacemaker will cost you something. But it'll cost you something in the short term, and it'll bring life and joy and meaning and unity in the long term. So if we become people of calm and compassion, if we become people of empathy, people who listen well, people who don't just have empathy in our heads, we restate that empathy right as we're listening to people, people will pay attention. We will stand out, and it will be a thing that is in short supply in our day and age. So, payback is cheap, empathy is priceless. Our next thought is that the best answer has both love and logic. The best answer has both love and logic. So, we're talking about conflict, right? We're talking about conflict resolution. But there's a conflict that could exist in this room. It's certainly a conflict that exists in this city, and that's that most of the people in this city, many of the people in this city, don't believe what we believe. There's a conflict right there, boom, conflict. It's the conflict that there's clashing worldviews. That is a conflict, and people would be quick to point out it's created conflict throughout history. It's created wars, conflicts in our society. It could create conflict at your Thanksgiving table. It's the clash of worldviews. How do we be peacemakers when we have different beliefs from those around us? And this was exactly what Peter's audience was facing. They were saying Jesus is Lord, and all their neighbors were saying Caesar is Lord. And it was creating conflict for them. And we saw in chapter 2, and he really restates it here in verse 12, verse 13. He's restating what he already said in chapter 2. He's saying, seek the common good. Show them you are not the enemy. Show them that you are doing good. You're seeking to bless your neighbors. You don't have this. I think a lot of what he's alluding to when he's saying like doing evil, he's like, don't try to overthrow your masters. Don't try to assassinate Caesar. Show them that you're for the common good. And then they're going to be more receptive to your message. They're going to see that you're a peacemaker. But then look at verse 14. But if you should suffer for what's right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats or be frightened. He's quoting from Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah in the Old Testament. I'll give you a 15-second recap of the story. Is the Assyrians are coming and invading Jerusalem. Everybody's terrified. King Ahaz is terrified of the Assyrians. And the Lord speaks through Isaiah, and he says, the Lord Almighty is the one you should regard as holy. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. Quick little aside. He takes a verse about Yahweh. You should regard Yahweh as holy. He applies it to Jesus. He says, sanctify Jesus in your hearts. He's still quoting Isaiah. It's amazing. But then he says, do not fear the Assyrians. Don't be frightened. Reverence Yahweh. Reverence Jesus. Amazing. And Peter, he appropriates that. He says, don't fear the Romans. Don't be afraid of the Romans. Don't be afraid of your neighbors. I love what he's doing here. It's amazing. He's saying, don't fight back, but don't back down. Don't get even, but don't give in. Isn't that this amazing tension? And that's what we've been saying the whole time about the way of exile, Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel. That's exactly what they did. Don't pay them back, but don't back down. Don't get even, but don't give in. And that's what we're called to do too. We're meant to love our neighbors, to love our city, to seek the common good of the city, but at the same time, to not give in to the values of the city. Now look at verse 15. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. That's still quoting Isaiah. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you the reason for the hope that is in you, but do this with gentleness and respect. This is one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible, because the word there for answer is the Greek word apologia, all right? And then the word for reason is the word logos. And what that is you hear the word logos, it's where we get our word logic from. Logic. He's saying give a logical answer. The Greeks believed that every person an educated person, an enlightened person, should be able to give a logical explanation of their views. And he's telling them, hey, just like the Greeks say there should be a logical explanation, every Christian should be able to give a logical explanation. Now, some American churches are anti-intellectual. And I think it's what turns a lot of people off, is there are a lot of churches in the United States that are anti-intellectual, where they say, it's just faith. If you have any doubts, if you have any questions, get out. If you got doubt, get out. That's the mentality, but that is lazy and that is unnecessary, and it's a tragedy. The Bible says that Christians should not only be able to say what to believe, but why to believe it. The Bible says that we should have love in our hearts and logic in our heads. And that is crucial in a city like Portland. It's one of the founding values of counterculture, is that we want to be a church where if you invite your skeptical friend, or maybe you are here this morning, you don't know what you believe, you're not sure, or maybe you don't believe, maybe you're an atheist, that you will be expected, respected, and challenged. That there's going to be courtesy, there's going to be warmth, there's going to be an appreciation where your doubts, your criticisms are legitimized and validated. But at the same time, you're going to be invited to see things perhaps from a different angle. That is one of the founding ideas of counterculture. It comes right here from 1 Peter chapter 3:15. Now, I was at Director Park this week, and I was talking to a guy who was on his lunch break. He was enjoying a delicious sandwich. I wish I had his sandwich. It looked so good. But I was talking with this guy, and he goes, I grew up in a Christian home. It was a really bad experience. I'm an engineer. I'm more scientifically minded. And so I'm an atheist. That's why I'm an atheist. Just, bad experience with church, and I'm kind of more a scientifically minded person. Now, this is a common question people have. And the way I think you could summarize a lot of people's views is they would go, ancient people, they didn't understand nature. They didn't understand the way physical laws worked. And so they had these myths about spirits and demons and gods and Zeus throwing lightning bolts. But then gradually we became more rational. We became more scientific. We developed empiricism. We developed the scientific method, inductive reasoning. We don't need those primitive superstitions anymore about a god or a devil or heaven or hell. The only light we need is the light of reason and science. And I want to just say that's an important question. That's an important question, but I also want to share with you some things that I have learned. And the things that I want to share with you is I want to share with you the origin of science, something that science has discovered, and then a problem within science, or a problem for science. Okay, real quick, I'll try to fly through them. If some of your eyes glaze over, just forgive me for that, okay? Some of you will really dig it. The engineers might like it, I don't know. But if your eyes glaze over, well, just be thinking about where you're going to go for brunch or whatever, that's fine. But first thing is the origin of science. So Alfred North Whitehead, he co-authored with Bertrand Russell, one of the most famous atheists of the 20th century, a book called Principia Mathematica, which is considered like the great, I don't even understand that stuff, but it's like the greatest mathematics book ever. He was also a philosopher of science, but he pointed this out. We assume that every occurrence has a definite cause exemplifying general principles. Without this belief, the incredible labors of scientists would be without hope. What is the origin? It must come from the medieval insistence on the irrationality of God. And he points out that although tons of civilizations had amazing technology, there's only one civilization that produced the scientific method. Only one. And that was medieval Europe. That's the only place, although they had great technology, we're not disparaging other people's intelligence here. We're just saying that in these cultures that believed the universe was an illusion, like Hinduism, or believed in lots of gods fighting, like lots of the traditional pagan societies, they didn't come to believe in laws. Why did we come to believe in the laws of nature? Why did we come to believe in the scientific method? Alfred North Whitehead will tell you, men came to believe in the laws of nature because they believed in one lawgiver. The rationality of God was the soil that the scientific method grew from. That's Alfred North Whitehead. All right, next thought. John says that the logos, I always get it mixed up because logic, it's actually pronounced logos for the Greeks, for the seminary students who are judging me, who probably aren't even in the room. But Logos, but the Logos created the universe. That's what John says in John chapter 1. And that means there's a logic behind the universe. So the next thing I want to show you is what science has discovered. There's lots of things I can show you, but I'm just going to show you this one. I think it's the most potent. It's the fine-tuning of the universe. So we know there's a certain speed of light, right? There's certain precise, delicately, finely tuned physical properties within the laws of physics. There's the gravitational constant. There's the strong and weak nuclear forces. These all have precise values. Just imagine dials, like one buddy said, imagine a universe-making machine. In order to make our universe, you have to set all of these dials perfectly precisely, okay? And if you don't set the dial perfectly, the universe can't exist. Planets can't form, galaxies can't form, chemistry can't form. It has to be perfect, all right? The universe doesn't come into existence. These are about the laws of physics. The odds of a universe like ours with delicate physics emerging is 1 in 10 to the 123rd power. All right, that is okay, so this is a percentage, all right? Percentage might be helpful for you. Percentage, this is 0.0 with 123 zeros, 1% chance of our universe emerging. Richard Dawkins, who is the most famous atheist on the planet, and Hitchens said about the same thing, recently in an interview with Francis Collins said, this argument is strong enough it could make me a deist. Amazing. It's pretty incredible. All right, the final thing I want to show you is a problem for science. So we said the origin of science, something discovered by science, and now we're going to say a problem for science. Now, I'm going to say something, but I am not critiquing science here, per se. I'm not critiquing the scientific method. I'm critiquing atheistic science, and I'm not even critiquing all evolution. I'm just critiquing atheistic evolution. But I want to show you this quote by Charles Darwin. Darwin wrote in a letter to a friend, "The horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has arisen from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or trustworthy at all." Now, we'll leave that on the screen. Let me explain that for you. If my brain exists solely for the purpose of passing on my genes, then that completely undermines my ability to assume that my brain is rational. And I know this is, a mind bender, all right? But this is the kind of things Darwin was worried about, and by the way, I could show you dozens of other philosophers, modern ones, who have the same dilemma. But I'll try to put a finer point on it. I got to be careful here because this one can be like, when you try to bring it down for laymen, sometimes you can mess up the argument a little bit, but I'll do my best here. One way you could do it is this: what part of your body do you use for science? Where do you do science? In my brain. And where did your brain come from? Random mutations. How do you know you can trust your brain? That's the idea. I'll give it to you one more way. So you're having a conversation with somebody who doesn't believe God exists. They believe that we got here through Darwinian natural selection. And they go, "You're a person of faith, and I'm a person of reason. You have belief, but I believe in science." And you go to them and you go, "Well, why do you think so many people around the world have believed in God? Billions of people have believed in a creator. Why do you think that is?" They go, "God is just an illusion that helped our ancestors survive." And you go, "Well, what about beauty? Doesn't the beauty of the world make you believe that there might be an artist behind that beauty?" They go, "Well, no, beauty is an illusion that just helped our ancestors survive." And you go, "Well, what about morality? Don't you believe there's an ultimate morality and that if there's an ultimate morality, there must be a moral lawgiver?" They go, No. Morality is just an illusion that helped our ancestors survive." And then you go, "How do you know that rationality isn't just an illusion that helped our ancestors survive?" And that's actually the argument that made C.S. Lewis become a theist after being an atheist for 40 years. It was that one right there. So those are a couple things. But how do you share all of this without it turning into a conflict? Let's go back to 1 Peter 3:15. Do this with gentleness and respect. Do this with gentleness and respect. Dunking on people, pulling out your Bible bazooka, trying to blow people away. You see those YouTube videos, Christian owns atheist, returning the rage bait for more rage bait. I cooked that guy. I took him to Sunday school. The Bible says that as good as that may feel, Jesus was a friend of sinners. We're supposed to be gentle like physicians, not brutal like butchers. And your argument can be right, but your motives can be dead wrong. And why you're doing something will affect how you do something. If you're doing it to show how smart you are, how much better you are than that person, how much more you know, your motive's all wrong. And your how will be all wrong. But if your motive is love, your methods will be gentleness and grace. So I want to show you this. Maybe you grew up in a church and had a bad experience, maybe felt it was anti-intellectual, but Peter is inviting us into a faith that both sharpens our mind and softens our hearts. In other words, he's calling us to be people of both love and logic. All right, our final thought today is this. Jesus took the hook when we took the bait. So we call our message rage bait, right? Jesus took the hook when we took the bait. Verse 17, it's better if it's God's will to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body and made alive in the spirit. My little daughter is in second grade, and it's been fun seeing her in first and second grade. And I wanted to show you this little picture. Anybody remember doing these, right? You got the little dotted line. Got the dotted line here. He's writing to suffering people, and he's saying, hey, suffer patiently. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't lash back. Don't clap back. Don't get that one-liner in, when they give it to you. He said this in chapter 2, that Christ left an example that you should follow in his steps. In Greek, they had the little dotted line too. That's how even ancient cultures taught their kids how to write. And the word that Peter uses for example and steps is this little sheet. Tracing little dotted line. Jesus is your dotted line. Jesus is your dotted line. The goal of the Christian life is to become more like Jesus. We're saved by Jesus. We're saved through Jesus' sacrifice, not through our sacrifice. But once we're saved, we're meant to grow more like Jesus, to follow his example. Now, Jesus was a peacemaker. Jesus didn't take the bait. Jesus lived with compassion. One thing I think you can say biblically is Jesus is the empathy of God. Jesus is the empathy of God. He came and walked in our shoes. He came and carried our burdens. But if I just lift that up to you as a standard and I say, now go forgive. Don't get mad. Don't lash back. Never clap back. Never return the rage bait. Never give out the outrage back in return. Never fight fire with fire. You'll try for a while, and I'll try for a while, and we'll get burnt out, won't we? We'll try it for a little bit, and it's like, well, that's a standard. It's too high of a standard. But what if instead I told you to focus on Jesus' compassion for you? What if I told you to dwell on and meditate and bask in the fact that when we had all gone wrong, when we'd all been unrighteous, when we'd all taken the bait, when we let the badness of the world make us bad, when we let the cruelty of others make us cruel, when we let other people's meanness make us mean, when we had done life our way and rebelled against God, when we should have been on the hook, when we were right in that moment where he could have crushed us, when he could have served it back to us, when he could have come down on us the way we'd come against him. Instead, Jesus bore your penalty. Instead, he came and walked in our shoes. Instead, he came and showed us compassion. Instead, he showed us empathy. When we had gone wrong, Jesus came to make us right. We took the bait, but Jesus took the hook. And that's the message of the cross. That's the message of communion. See, every religion gives you a standard. Jesus gives you a source. He's your source. So that as you receive his love for you when you didn't deserve it, you gradually become able to love others when they don't